go, Fritz.
The Bears are who we thought they were.
The Bears. The Bears.
I am the great Cornholio.
We'll see what happens.
Playoffs?
See, Sean McDonough, Jay Billis. Goats!
Can you play a song? Something cool. Put my mic on!
I'm calling both games.
Oh, baby!
Are you serious? Goes down the field for Smith. Oh, he got it!
Seattle. We're getting ready for Cincinnati.
The Big Ten and SEC have been really disappointing. Super disappointing, in fact. The Big Ten, however, this has been a common theme. Another year of, hey, the Big Ten's really great. We got so many teams in. This year, the Big Ten had the most teams out of any conference in the NCAA tournament with 9. They had Purdue, Indiana, Rutgers, Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Illinois, Iowa. You get the gist. Tons of teams. 9 teams in the tournament. And take a wild guess. If you don't know already, take a wild guess as to how many are left. If you guessed 2, you would be correct. No, it's not 5, it's not 6, not 8, not 3. There are only 2 teams left out of the 9 that made the initial field of 68. And those 2 teams, we mentioned one of them before, Purdue, and then if you were paying close attention, we did mention Michigan as well, as they'll be playing Villanova. So you might be saying, okay, well, tons of upsets in March Madness. This kind of happens. What's your point? What are you getting at here? Well, what I'm getting at is the fact that the Big Ten has struggled in the past few years, right? Not only was it this year where they had a great season, right? Purdue was, I think, number 1 team in the country for a week or two. Wisconsin got into the top 10 for a few weeks. Iowa looked really good towards the end of the season. Illinois had their high point of the season as well. Everybody had their high point, right? And yet they all get to the NCAA tournament and, they, for lack of a better term, disappoint. And again, last year, same thing. This same thing happened. Ohio State looked amazing. Iowa looked amazing. And this is last year, of course. Purdue had their high point of the year. Everybody thought, man, these teams are going to do great in the tournament. Rutgers made it in last year. Maryland made it in last year. There was a few other teams making it in as well. Michigan State lost in the first 4 last year. Michigan was number 1 seed last year. And, they lost. And we'll go through these teams a little bit here. Illinois also made it last year. They were number 1 seed. And so same thing. Each of these past couple of years, the Big Ten looked great, and everybody was raving about how great the Big Ten is, right? Big Ten's going to have, all these teams go to the Final Four, the Elite Eight, all that good stuff. And people were saying, Ohio State is a very underrated team. They could play well against Villanova. Well, they got shellacked against Villanova, right? People like me, some idiot like me said Iowa could make it to the Final Four. They didn't even win the first round. I don't know who could have possibly thought Iowa could make the Final Four. Me. No way I did that, right? And it's confusing, right? Indiana looked okay in the first 4 games against Wyoming, and then looked like they didn't even belong on the same basketball court as St. Mary's. Rutgers kept it, played Notre Dame tough. That was just a tough matchup. Wisconsin was another team that people were really excited about, thought, man, Wisconsin could make it to the Final Four. And they don't even make it to the second weekend. They don't even make it to the Sweet 16. Illinois was a 4 seed. A lot of people thought, sure, they lost Ayo Dosunmu to the draft, but a lot of they have the same core there, right? Illinois can do this. And they just came out flat against Houston. And for me at least, I don't know about all the experts and all the analytics nerds and all the KenPom and net ranking and who knows what, right? Everybody's got their own ranking at this point. Everybody's got their own analytics system. I say throw those analytics in the garbage, because every year they say the Big Ten's the best conference in the country, and then, the Big Ten poops their pants when it comes to the tournament. And again, I don't know about these experts, but for me at least, next year I will for sure be looking at the Big Ten under a very different scope than I have in previous years, because they've proved to me this year is the year that I can't say they're going to get it next year. This was the year, last year I set up, they're going to get it next year, right? Big Ten's got this. They're going to pull through one of these years. I'm sorry, it's just not happening. A lot of these teams are very similar to each other, and that's why there's such a high level of competition in the Big Ten. But they're very competitive with each other. But once you step out of that conference and play other teams, they just not the same team. And there was a turning point in the season where I kind of thought this would happen, and it was when as I've talked about Maryland basketball, Maryland Terrapins a lot over the course of this year. And, if you listen to any of the shows, you might, you may have figured out that Maryland didn't have the best year this year, right? Maryland wasn't breaking any records. Maryland wasn't, they weren't surprising anybody in a good way, at least. They were surprising people in a bad way. But they weren't going to go out and pull any, crazy upset. But the turning point of this year, when I said to myself, I don't think the Big Ten is as good as people think it is, was when Maryland went out on Super Bowl Sunday and almost beat Purdue. Purdue at the time was top 5. They may have even been ranked 3rd at the time. Not exactly sure, but they were top 10 for sure, is the point. And Maryland was, was just, an eyelash away from beating them. And then after that game, I thought, I don't think the Big Ten is as good as everybody says it is. And then Maryland comes out and beat Ohio State at home on the night that they honor the 2002 national championship team. And, all right, you're honoring that national championship team. You're probably going to play hard in that game. I get that. But there is no reason that Maryland should have been able to keep the lead in the game against Ohio State for the majority of the game and win. Maryland, beat Rutgers 1 out of 2 times this season. It should have been both times. They blew an 11-point halftime lead in the first game, the game that was played in College Park. And Maryland played, I think it was Illinois, they played pretty well at one point as well. And there's just, it was from that point on that I thought to myself, the Big Ten is not as good as people think it is, and they're going to disappoint in the tournament. But I didn't listen to myself, and I picked a lot of Big Ten teams to move on in the tournament. But as I mentioned last week, I saw Chattanooga. I said Chattanooga could beat Illinois. They almost did. Illinois had the lead for a total of 25 seconds in the game, but it was the right 25 seconds. It was the last 25 seconds. They win that game by the skin of their teeth, and then they go and get absolutely embarrassed against Houston in round 2. Illinois has not made it to the second weekend of the tournament since 2005 when they made it to the championship game. Remember last year they were the number 1 seed in the Midwest. They won the first game against 16th seeded Texas Southern or whoever. It was Drexel is what it was. And then they lost to Loyola Chicago in the second round. This year, again, barely beat Chattanooga, lose to Houston. And Wisconsin, last year they beat North Carolina. They lost to Baylor. And now, of course, Baylor went on to win the national championship. So what do you want to do there, right? Wisconsin was a 9th seed. Maybe you weren't expecting too much out of them last year. This year, they were a 3 seed. A lot of people said, hey, watch out for Wisconsin, a sleeper pick for the Final Four. They beat Colgate. And Colgate, I believe, was sticking around in that game for a large portion of it. And then they go in and they lose to Iowa State. And we'll get to that later. But Iowa State hasn't scored more than 60 points in the tournament so far, and they're in the Sweet 16. Iowa State was a team that I thought had no chance of even winning one game, or if any, they would beat LSU, but they would quickly get humbled by Wisconsin. And I was wrong about that one. Somehow Wisconsin just, I don't get it. They had, so much talent on that team this year. Johnny Davis was one of the more prolific scorers, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country. And, you've got 300th year senior Brad Davison on that team. You got the experience there, and you just flush it down the toilet. You just, it all goes to shreds. It's disappointing, to say the least. Indiana, as I mentioned, wasn't even competitive against St. Mary's. I don't even think I watched more than 5 minutes of that game. It was so bad. Iowa, another just, I mean, as I mentioned, I was stupid and picked them to go to the Final Four for some reason. But what do you want from me? They had a really hot end of the season. They were great, and then they just forgot how to play basketball all of a sudden. And both seasons, both of the last 2 seasons, they were a top 5 seed, and they didn't even make it to the second weekend. Last year, they were the number 2 seed in the Western region. They beat 15th seed at Grand Canyon, lost to Oregon. This year, they didn't even make it to the second round. They lost to Richmond, a team that, if Richmond didn't win the Atlantic 10, probably wouldn't have been in the tournament. And at this point, you just kind of throw your hands up in the air and say, what do you do? You just don't understand how the Big Ten can have such a great regular season, and then it goes down the drain in the tournament, right? Michigan State, you beat Davidson by 1 point by the skin of your teeth. We're close to not even winning that one, and then you gave Duke everything that you could. Credit goes there. Rutgers loses in a tough first 4 game to Notre Dame. That's tough, right? Somebody's got to lose that one. But it's not just the fact that these teams that had really good seasons go in and lose in the first 2 rounds. It is the manner and how they lose. Illinois to Houston, that was a bad game for Illinois. One of the worst games of the season for Illinois. A terrible way to go out. And three teams. So, in the Big Ten, I should say, they went in with 9, right? 7 of them are eliminated. 3 out of those 7 teams that were eliminated all lost to lower seeds. Wisconsin lost to 11th seed Iowa State. Iowa lost to 12th seed Richmond. And Illinois loses to 5th seed Houston. Well, and I understand that the Houston-Illinois, that's a 4-5 matchup, very close there. But still, you're the higher seed. And didn't even get to the second weekend. It's got to be very disappointing and very frustrating for these Big Ten teams. Also, another disappointing conference, at least from my standpoint, was the SEC. There were 6 SEC teams initially in, and now there's only 1 team left, and that is Arkansas. And as I mentioned, Arkansas played 2 double-digit seeds. They haven't even played anybody. They've played a 13th and a 12th seed. That's it. And they struggled against both those teams. They escaped by the hairs of their chinny chin chin in those games. And I don't know. I just feel like that's setting them up for disaster against Gonzaga. You had 3 first-round exits and 2 second-round exits. In the first round, in the first 2 rounds, all 5 of the eliminated SEC teams lost to double-digit seeds. All eliminated by double-digit seeds. Kentucky loses to St. Peter's. They were a 15th seed. Alabama loses to Notre Dame, an 11th seed. LSU loses to Iowa State, another 11th seed. Auburn, in the second round, they lose to Miami, a 10th seed. And Tennessee loses to 11th seed in Michigan. And out of those teams, 3 of them were popular Final Four picks. Kentucky, as I mentioned earlier, was a team that a lot of people thought, hey, this is a team that's got a chance to go to the Final Four this year. And they didn't even make it to the second round. They didn't make it to the final 32. Auburn, another one. People, myself, I said, well, look out for Auburn. They can make a run this year. And I even said, hey, Auburn maybe should have been more deserving of a 1 seed over Baylor. Well, they proved me wrong there, right? They lose to Miami by 18. Well, they didn't even keep it competitive with Miami. I mean, they made Miami look like, I don't even know. They've just played so poorly in that game against Miami. And then Tennessee, a team that they go and they win the SEC championship at the tournament, and a lot of people said, well, they're going to play Michigan or Colorado State in the second round. You win that game, Villanova, that's a toss-up. They lose to Michigan, a team that, I mean, they didn't even have a coach for the last 5 games because he punched somebody in the face. They were a team that had 17 wins. Michigan was 17-11. And they were, not only myself, but a lot of other people said Michigan probably should have had to play a first 4 game. They proved us all wrong. They go and they make the Sweet 16 as an 11th seed. So I think that when, in prior years we hear, the Big Ten and the SEC are the dominant conferences in college basketball, right? The ACC used to be, but they're no more. Well, I don't know about that anymore. I'm not so sure about that. The Big Ten and SEC might not be as good as we all think. And just real quick before we hit commercial break, and we're gonna continue this on the other side of the break. Auburn, just talk about disappointments. Auburn, number 1 team in the country for a large portion of the season, and they have nothing to show for it. They didn't even make it to the SEC championship game. They don't even make it to the second weekend. They don't even make a Sweet 16 appearance. I mean, that has just got to be one of the more heart-wrenching, heartbreaking, just awful ends to the season for a team, because a lot of people thought Auburn had a chance to really do something special this spring, and they are heading home after one weekend. Just incredibly disappointing.